Hello, everyone. This is Debra Richardson, and today I am putting the AP in Happy, where accounts payable teams are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. This podcast will give a voice to accounts payable team members by talking about the growing reality of cyber attacks in their world and which vendor setup and vendor management techniques they can apply to protect the vendor master file from fraud. Need training? Visit the Vendor Process Training Center to enroll in your choice of weekly live and on-demand training sessions. Plus, get access to vendor setup form templates and reference tools that will help you and your team avoid fraud, fines, and bad vendor data. So sign up for a free account to get access to free training sessions, vendor process FAQs, and a resource library with information you need to manage your vendor master file. Visit training.debrarrichardson.com today. The link will be in the show notes. Is your company based in the U.S.? Well, you may be familiar with the Office of Foreign Assets Control, or OFAC, but do you know what other watch lists are required based on your company's attributes or your vendors? If you want 5 steps to build a watch list compliance matrix to avoid fraud and fines, keep listening. Welcome to episode 325, Build a Watchlist Compliance Matrix to Avoid Fraud and Fines in 5 steps. Now, this session is actually a webinar that was recorded in December 2024, and this podcast is being published in February of 2025. So it's very recent, and it goes over how to start building a watch list compliance matrix that you can really customize for your company. And so I walk through 5 steps to discover how to determine which watch lists are applicable for your company and what you should do if a vendor is found on a watch list. Now, the webinar is sponsored by Financial Operations or Financial Operation Network's Vendor Info, which is a vendor self-registration portal, but they also have a standalone portal just for the AP team to do validations, including watchlist validations. So thankfully they sponsored it, which means it's at no cost to you. And why is that important? It's because in that webinar, I did give out a template for the watchlist compliance matrix. So you can, and I'll put a link to it in the description, but you can go to the webinar itself and you can actually watch the video of the webinar. It's about 30 minutes. And you can then download a PDF of the presentation and also the watch list matrix. And there's also a PDF from vendor info or about vendor info and what they offer. So again, I will put a link to that in the show notes, but here is the webinar. All right, so we have about 1 more minute before the top of the hour, but I just wanted to get on and make sure that everything was straight, and it looks like you guys can hear me. Let's see. I don't always see if you can see my screen, but if you can't see my screen, somebody just let me know. But we should be ready to go. Oh, and we are right at the top of the hour. So welcome to the monthly webinar series for 2024. The series title or theme is in 5 steps. So every month I'll show you how to do something in 5 steps. So make sure you follow that hashtag on LinkedIn. But this month's webinar is build a watch list compliance matrix to avoid fraud and fines in 5 steps. You guessed that right. So I am Debra R. Richardson. I'll do a quick bio in just a moment. But this webinar is sponsored by Financial Operations Networks, and more on them to come as well. Now, some housekeeping items before we begin. This session is being recorded. Tomorrow, the same time, you will receive a link where you or anyone that you share the link with can register. And yes, I do mean re-register. Sorry, but the platform requires that. But re-register if you want to rewatch the webinar, and you can also download any handouts if you were not able to download any today. And if you are watching this on demand, make sure you click in the upper left-hand side of the player, and you'll see like a document icon, and you can download the handouts from there. And again, that will be available starting tomorrow. The same time, you will receive an email with that link to register for the on-demand recording. And again, be sure to share that with anyone you think that might find this material valuable. All right, and then as for questions, you can submit your questions anytime. They will be saved for the Q&A session. Hopefully we'll have about 5 minutes for that. And then lastly, don't forget to download the handout. So I do have a PDF of this presentation. I also have an Excel template or Excel file for the watch list compliance matrix. So make sure you download that so you can follow along. And then also I have a handout from Financial Operations Network called Compliance Responsibilities and Vendor Setup. It has a lot of good information, so make sure that you download that as well. Now, briefly, just about me, again, I am Debra R. Richardson, and I was a practitioner. I was an AP Senior Manager over Global Vendor Setup and Maintenance, where I led a team of 17. We processed about 2,000 vendor requests per month and maintained 140,000 active vendors across 7 different ERPs. And so a lot of the content that I produce now as a consultant, trainer, and speaker are those things where I really didn't have a lot of places to go for resources, and I didn't really know what to do. And so that's the type of content that I produce today. And this specific content came from the fact that when I was a practitioner, we had someone that was supposed to be doing it, or another department that was supposed to be doing, right, the watch list validations. And somehow with the transition from one position to another, a new person came on, The final person I asked about it had no idea what I was talking about. And so I knew we needed to take control. And that's what I want to give you today, the ability to take control and at least initiate that process of identifying what is required or what watch lists are required for your company. So let's go ahead and get started with that. So first of all, I'm going to go ahead and turn this camera off because I definitely don't want to have any technical issues, but I did want to have it on through the intro. So hey, everyone, I'm going to go ahead and shut this off and we will get started. All right, so hopefully your screen got bigger too, so that'll make it a little bit easier to see. But the agenda today, we're going to be talking about the common pain points in sanction screening or watch list screening, whatever you want to call it, that lead to fraud and fines. And then we're going to talk about the 5 steps to build that OFAC and other sanction screening compliance matrix to avoid fraud and fines. And then hopefully we'll have up to 5 minutes for Q&A. So if you do have questions, make sure you put them in the question section at the time that the question comes up. But first, I'm going to launch the only poll that is included in this webinar. And it's a very simple question, and it is, does your organization currently have a way to automatically perform sanction screening? So very easy answer. Answer yes, you do. Answer no, you don't. Or maybe you don't know if you have that. So yes, no, unsure, go ahead and everyone vote. Hopefully I can get more than half, and I'd love to get more than 75%. So those of you that are on, go ahead, that are on live. Actually, you'll have it in the on-demand version as well. Go ahead and make sure you answer that poll question. Looks like I got about 65% of those of you that are on live. So let's see if we can get that to 75% or more. And I'll close that, and then you can see how everyone else is doing as far as having an automatic way to perform sanction screening. So I got it at 77%. Thanks everyone that voted. I'm going to go ahead and close, and then let's share what that looks like. And so it looks like 80% are no. Wow. Okay, but that's great. So, well, not great, but don't feel bad because a lot of folks are in your same position. But we do have some options for you. Yes, 10%. That's really good. And then 10% are unsure. All right, so let me go ahead and close that. And let's now start with taking a look at some of the common pain points in sanction screening that really lead to frauds and fines, because there really are many federal, state, country level agencies that have watch lists that may apply to your company, right? It's not all just about OFAC. Also, there are fraudsters, right, that have already proven that they are fraudsters. They have already committed fraud, and so they are on these lists, and you do need to make sure you check them so you're not the latest victim of their fraud, and also so you may not be fined, or your company won't be fined for paying them. And again, a great resource for that information on the compliance requirements in watch list screening is the handout by Financial Operations Network, the compliance handout for vendor setup. So go ahead and make sure you download that. Now, here's some common pain points. I've identified 4. And the first one is you don't really know which sanction screenings are required. So I still run into teams that are not aware of OFAC, which is the U.S. Department of Treasury's Office of Finance, or Office of Foreign Asset Control. And even if they are aware of it, they may not be aware that they also need to check that set of consolidated lists for foreign financial institutions as well. We'll get more into that. The other thing I want to say is that, not all sanctions lists are common across all companies. Government entities have different watch lists versus corporations versus healthcare organizations. So you really can't just check and see what everybody else is doing, or take the watch list that you used to check against from your last position to your next position, because it could be different, which is why this training on this webinar, I think, is very critical. The next one is you really don't know how to perform sanction screening. So let's say you do need to check against certain watch lists, but how do you do that? Is it a tool? Is there a platform that offers multiple watch list checks with one click that can make that whole process more efficient versus going to individual watch lists, which is what we used to do when I was a practitioner, at least initially. So that's another pain point. Another one is you may know which ones to check against and how to perform that check, but sanction screening checks are not consistently done. I talked about how there was a department that was supposed to do ours on a recurring basis, and as the position or people, moved throughout that position, it just got lost. And so you do need to make sure that you're doing them consistently. And a big reason for that is because these sanctions lists are not static. They do change. And so whether you're doing it, whether another group is doing it, you need to make sure someone is consistently doing those checks. And then the last one is even if you do find a vendor on a list, you get a hit, how do you know what to do after that point. That actually is a big one. So I know we do these watch lists and behind the scenes, or, we are just hoping that we do not have a hit, that it's just another step that we have to do, take that screenshot, to say that we did it. But what happens if a vendor is found on that list? So that's another pain point. Now, in this webinar, we will review a 5-step process to handle all of these pain points by building your very own sanction screening compliance matrix template. And I think I called it Watchlist Compliance Matrix Template. But make sure you download that. And again, you might want to do it now so you can follow along. But it starts off with 44 different watch lists. May or may not be applicable for you. You may need more than that, but at least this is something that will get you started. And I did want to mention that all of these watch lists are included in the vendor info self-registration portal, as well as the standalone validation tool for the AP or the vendor team. And these are both by Financial Operations Networks. Again, more on these tools to come. All right, so let's jump into the 5 steps to build an OFAC sanctions screening compliance matrix. Man, I call this all types of things, but this is your watch list compliance matrix. Now, I just have a screenshot here, but again, you can go ahead and download the Excel template so you can follow along. And then that way, if you discover any questions as you're following along, you can ask before the webinar is done. So the first columns include the organization, the sanctions list. I do have an abbreviation because on some tools they do abbreviate. And I did include some of the information from research that I did, like whether or not there are fines and penalties. You'll need to do more research to verify that, because they can change. Also, a description of what that watch list is, a link so you can do more due diligence on it. And then these are the pieces that you are going to fill out, whether it's applicable, how to perform it, how often to perform, and then the next step if your vendor is on that watch list. So let's now start with the 5 steps. Now, step 1, and I really encourage everyone to do this, even if you are saying, hey, we don't have non-US vendors or international vendors, right? I challenge you to run a report in each of your accounting systems or ERPs, and on that report, we just had a question about where to download. So it should be, it's in the handout section on your panel. And you might need to find a little orange arrow somewhere because the panel may be collapsed. So to download the matrix, make sure you find that little orange arrow or orange rectangle with a white arrow, and then expand it, and you should be able to see the handout section. But in any event, start with identifying where your vendor, what countries your vendors exist in, because that could make a difference in the watch list. And it's very key information to know. So if you think you don't have any, make sure you run a report in each of your accounting systems or ERPs. And on that report, pull out the vendor ID, the city, state, and country. And then when you do that, look at the states, right, that don't match abbreviations like IR, GB, UK, right? You want to make sure you're finding those things where the internal team member that set that vendor up that may not have known how to put in an international address, right, that they would have done or may have done. And so try to find those international vendors that are hidden that way. And even if you do know you have international vendors, maybe you'll find additional countries that you didn't know vendors were in by using that method. Now, if you do find vendors that have let's say for their state, CA or CO, that could be, I don't know, Canada or California. That could be Colombia or Colorado. You'll want to do some additional due diligence, or maybe pull out the address, right, along with it, so that, or go and look at the address so you can see if that is a state address here in the US, or if that perhaps belongs to another country. So key here is you need to identify what countries your vendors exist in. And now in step 2, you want to take that matrix and you want to identify sanctions lists or watch lists that may be applicable for your company. And here are some questions that you can use to add, or that you can ask to identify whether or not a watch list is applicable for you. Now, the first one is for all U.S. companies to comply. Look at those that require all U.S. companies to comply. A great one is the Department of Treasury, the OFAC consolidated list. And keep in mind, it's not just one list. The Office of Foreign Assets Control is a couple of sets of consolidated lists. And so you want to make sure that you're aware of that, because if you take a look at what countries your vendors exist in and look at the watch lists that are applicable for it, right, there could be other watch lists on that consolidated list. And I don't have it listed here, but I talked about it before. If you have foreign or non-US vendors that you are paying via ACH, there is a watch list included on OFAC, included in those consolidated lists. It's the CAPTA list, and that means that you need to check your vendor's foreign financial institution, your vendor banks that are foreign, against those lists, because the same way that you're not supposed to pay vendors that appear on the list, you are also not supposed to send payments to banks that appear on that list as well. There could be other country-related watch lists, such as if you have vendors in England, you need to check them against the EU sanctions list. If you have any non-US vendor, maybe you need to check them against the Interpol wanted list. You also need to pay attention to what industry your company is in. I talked a little bit about it before, but if you are a public, municipal, government, right, local city, state, county entity, you need to be checking against the System of Award Management, or SAM.gov's excluded parties list system, because those vendors are not supposed to receive federal funds. The same thing with healthcare. If you are a healthcare entity, the Office of Inspector General has identified excluded individuals and entities on their LEIE list that have already been convicted of Medicaid or Medicare fraud, and you are not allowed to pay them. And another great example is, remember during the pandemic at the beginning, when all the healthcare entities or organizations were trying to find, right, that personal protection equipment, PPE equipment, and so a lot of them were defrauded. But had they checked the denied persons list, they would have found those vendors that have already been convicted of fraud and have had their export privileges removed. And so that might have saved, right, some of those losses. Same thing, I don't know if you care about casinos, but there are state casino lists that you can check as well. And then you need to look at other watch lists that may be deemed necessary. This is where you will go to each of those watch lists, do your research, maybe click on that link, right? Do some additional due diligence to determine if they apply to your company. A great resource too is to check other departments. Ask what watch list they deem appropriate. If you have a department, we used to have a department that dealt with international vendors only, because there is like more due diligence that they would do, and so we would check with them to see which watch list they deemed appropriate, and we would make sure that we had those as part of our process as well. Now, once you identify, and if you take a look at the matrix, you'll see that there's a column there, whether or not is applicable. Put a yes, no, YN, whatever you want to put. Don't delete any, because you might have to, when you take it to other departments, as I'm going to suggest in another step, you don't want to have it, you want to have it there in case they determine it does need to be done. But during this step, you want to identify yes, no for each of the watch lists. And then once you identify which ones need to be done, go through them and identify how to do them. So if you're doing it manually, right, make sure you have a link to the individual resource to, right, do that validation or that check, or make sure you have a link to a tool, right? I talked about the standalone tool from Financial Operations Network, where you can do all the validations, actually not just the watch list, but all the watch list validations and some other ones as well, using that one tool. So how are you going to do it? Make sure you provide that information. And if it's automated, you know, maybe some of you have it triggered within your accounting system or ERP. Make sure that that trigger includes all of the watch lists that you determined during this process that need to be done. And then the same thing, maybe you have a vendor self-registration portal that has those checks. Make sure that that self-registration portal is performing all of the checks against the watch list you determined is required. And then identify how often to perform. Again, I talked about the watch list. Those lists are not static, right? You definitely want to do it at when you're adding a new vendor, but because they are not static and vendors can subsequently, right, be added to these watch lists, you also want to do it at different points, including when you have an existing vendor change. That is a perfect time to actually revalidate all of their information, including whether or not they have been added to a watch list. You can also have it at a specific time period where it's rechecked. If any of you have attended any of my talks or webinars on the 8 steps to clean your vendor master file, I always say it needs to be cleaned. My recommendation is to clean it on a monthly basis, and this is the reason why, because part of that one step in that 8-step process is to check again against watch lists. And if you don't have any other way to do it, the best way is to check it on a monthly basis, because technically you are not supposed to be paying these vendors that are on these watch lists. And if you think about how often you have pay cycle runs, a monthly basis is the best way to do it if you're doing manually. But maybe you have a way to continuously monitor. Not all of us have that. If you do have it, it's something probably your IT team set up. But if you have continuous monitoring, great. That is really great. But if you don't, you need to make sure that you're doing it at vendor setup, at vendor change, and then have it be done on a consistent basis, hopefully monthly. All right, and then step 4 is, where we go? Oh, and don't forget to add it to your desktop procedures. I think I forgot I put that one in there. Make sure that all your team members know where to go to validate and actually how to validate and which ones need to be validated. All right, so step 4 is, now once you've identified all of these vendors or all of the watch lists that are applicable for your vendors and your company, make sure that if something is found, if they are found, what needs to be done. So if it's green, right, this is what we all hope for. But we know at some point there's going to be some vendors that are going to be on the list. And so you want to make sure that your vendor team knows what to do with it. Do they set the vendor up or put them on payment hold, right, if it's a new vendor add or existing vendor change? Do they not do anything and abandon the change? And then who should review it? Who do you send it to? Do you have a vendor risk management group, or is there an additional validation that can be done? For the Office of Inspector General. If you're a healthcare entity, for the Office of Inspector General, that exclusion list for those that have been caught with like Medicaid or Medicare fraud. If you find a vendor's name on the list, they actually have an additional place that you can go where you can put that tax ID in to see if that is really your vendor. It's that way with that watch list, and it's also the same way with the SAM.gov, that excluded parties list one as well. You can put in the tax ID, you can put in their DUNS number, I think, and then also that new unique entity identification number, the UEI. All right, and then the fifth one, last step, is to make sure you have leadership sign off. But before you do that, make sure you go and you get review and approval from risk management, your master data governance team, whatever teams have kind of that oversight over due diligence for the vendors, risk management, vendor risk management type duties. If you don't have that, no problem. Take it to your leadership and just make sure that you've got someone to review that with, or someone reviews it to see if there are any additional watch lists that maybe you didn't think you needed, but you do, or at least that knows the downstream effects, right, and can put you into contact with those departments that may need to be brought in as well. So make sure you have, you review it with leadership, and then that they sign off on it. All right, so those are the 5 steps for your building your watch list, and so that you can avoid fraud and fines. Now, really quickly, here's more information on vendor info by Financial Operations Networks. There are 2 options really for vendor onboarding. Both include checking your vendors against all sanctions lists that are included on the matrix that you have. But they do have one, a vendor self-registration portal, where you can really digitize, streamline the collection and validation of vendor information, really getting that information out of risky email. And then there is a second one that is really just based on performing multiple validations. It's a standalone tool. Your vendors don't have to go into it. This is something that you would use so that you can streamline your vendor validations by including them all in that one click, right? And that one click also can include bank account ownership validation, the IRS 10 match, address standardization, along with the watch list. Now, you can click each for more information or contact them by email end of the webinar. So I do want to thank everyone for attending today. And don't forget, tomorrow you will receive an email with a link to register to watch the recording and also download the handouts. Don't forget to share that with any colleagues that you think might find this information valuable. So thanks, everyone, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. All right, so I hope you enjoyed that webinar and you were able to get some value out of that 5-step process to build your watch list compliance matrix. And again, check the show notes for a link to the actual webinar if you want to watch the video and or download the handouts, which does include a PDF of the presentation, the actual watch list compliance matrix template, and then a download of more information about vendor info. So thanks, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the 325th episode of the Putting the AP in Happy podcast, where accounts payable teams are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. Don't forget to check the show notes for the links mentioned in the podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode, consider subscribing and writing a review of my podcast on the platform that you use to listen. Stay happy.